Let me start this video by asking you a question. Which should give better rewards, solo dungeons or their equivalent tier corrupted dungeons? Should a tier 8 solo dungeon give better or worse rewards than if you rat a Slayer corrupted dungeon? There are two main schools of thought when answering this question. First, corrupted dungeons should give better rewards because they carry a higher risk. Albion's all about risk versus reward, and so solo dungeons are safe after 90 seconds, whereas corrupted dungeons you can get invaded at any moment, so they are more dangerous and therefore should give better rewards. Second, and opposite, solo dungeons should give better rewards because the function or purpose of a corrupted dungeon in Albion is to provide a 1v1 arena for PvP, and the presence of ratting makes that experience worse or takes away from it in some way. Therefore, because they make the true purpose of corrupted dungeons worse, you should not be rewarded for doing it. Personally, I'm heavily in the second camp, but no matter which one you find yourself leaning towards, I'm going to definitively prove to you in this video that it literally doesn't matter because the rewards that corrupted dungeons give are so much better that you don't have any reason to ever do a solo dungeon, even if they are safer, which, spoiler alert, isn't completely true. Now, quick disclaimer before we start, the majority of stuff I'm going to be talking about in this video comes from my previous videos where I tested 100 solo dungeons of various tiers and then 100 corrupted dungeons. Now, I've only tested Slayer corrupted dungeons and not Stalkers or Hunters, but judging from my experience in the game and all the solo dungeons I've done, I doubt the results will be that much different between Slayers and Stalkers and Hunters. So just as a baseline, these are the sort of rewards compared to normal tier 8 solo dungeons, 8.1 solo dungeon maps, and Slayer corrupted dungeons that I got for doing 100. As you can see, even compared to 8.1 maps, which are some of the best solo dungeons in the game, the rewards are still heavily outshined by the Slayer corrupted dungeons. So the biggest difference between doing a solo dungeon and a corrupted dungeon is that in a solo dungeon you can guarantee safety during your clear by waiting 90 seconds at the start for the dungeon to close. Here's the problem. 90 seconds is a hell of a long time when talking about efficiently clearing dungeons for money and fame, much longer and more impactful on your fame and money per hour than most people realize. Let me give you an example. When I did 100 normal tier 8 solo dungeons, it took an average of 7 minutes and 30 seconds to clear each dungeon. If I was to wait 90 seconds at the start of each, that would mean that I would be spending 20% of my time sitting at the start doing nothing, instead of clearing, making money, and getting fame. That 90 seconds at the start of each dungeon adds up to a huge amount of time. How much? Well, just look at this. Let's say we were to make normal tier 8 solo dungeons equal to Slayer corrupted dungeons in terms of clear speed and loot per dungeon. In my video routing 100 Slayer corrupted dungeons, I made 365k per dungeon and took 6 minutes on average for each one. But it was my first time routing, so let's try to assume the best case scenario. If I was to get infamy higher before starting, you could pretty easily get to a place where you make an average of 400k per dungeon, and if I was to go back and optimize my build and clear now that I have experience, I bet I could clear at an average of around 5 minutes and 45 seconds per corrupted. Solo dungeons are nowhere close to this in terms of loot and clear speed, being slower in clears and less money per dungeon, but for the sake of argument, let's say they're the exact same. So we both have solo dungeons and corrupted dungeons making 400k per dungeon and clearing an average of 5 minutes and 45 seconds. Now let's say that in the corrupted dungeons you get invaded the same amount as I did in my video, 6 in 100 or around 1 in 17. Let's also say that your build is 1 million silver and you die every single time you get invaded, losing your 1 million set and the 400k from that dungeon. On the other hand, in solo dungeons, you play it safe and spend 90 seconds sitting at the start so that you can't get invaded. Which do you think is better money? The solo dungeons where you wait and be safe, or the corrupted dungeons where you die? Well, if you were to go out for an average trip of corrupted dungeons and do them until you die, it will take just under 96 minutes, and including the minus 1.4 mil from your death, you will make 5.267 million. If you go out for solo dungeons on the other hand, wait 90 seconds at the start of every dungeon and never die, you will make 5.287 million. Just 20,000 more than you did with corrupted dungeons. You essentially make the exact same amount of money. Now obviously this example is far from perfect, but there are two main points that I want to get across with this. First, the 90 seconds required to keep you safe in solo dungeons is very punishing to how much you make per hour. 90 seconds is a long time and it adds up fast. Second, I was super generous to solo dungeons in this example by giving them the same clear time and loot per dungeon as Corrupteds. In reality, the amount of money you make per hour in solo dungeons is far less than you do in Corrupteds. My max money per hour from solo dungeons was just over 2 million an hour, while my one attempt at Corrupteds yielded far more than 3 million an hour. And if you're wondering about fame and not just money, well, that was far better for Corrupteds as well, coming in at 1.7 mil an hour versus a top of 1.4 mil an hour when I did 8.1 solo dungeons. But it doesn't even stop there. Remember the question I started with: should Corrupted or solo dungeons give better rewards? One of the answers is that Corrupteds should give better rewards because they are less safe. If they carry a bigger risk, they should give a bigger reward. But is that actually even true? When looking at the safety of Corrupted versus solo dungeons, it's very misleading to look at the safety while clearing the dungeon in isolation. You also have to account for how you get to and from the dungeons, how you get the loot back safely, how you travel between dungeons. All of these factors affect the safety of dungeons as well, not just if you can die while clearing it. And it just so happens that all of these other factors favor Corrupted dungeons over solo dungeons. First, how do you get to and from the dungeon? Well, for Corrupteds, you walk out of Carleon into the safest red zones in the game and hop into a Corrupted, or go into the black zone, drink the Invis juice, and go into a Corrupted from invisibility. There's almost zero risk. Solos, on the other hand, are also low risk for low tiers, but once you start hitting tier 7 and tier 8, it gets pretty risky to travel to and from. Red zone tier 7s make you travel through a couple red zones, which are far more dangerous than the ones adjacent to Carleon, and tier 8s are so deep in the black zone that you are highly likely to get ganked when going to and from them. It's definitely more dangerous to go to and from your solos than it is to Corrupteds at a high tier. 2. How do you get your loot back safely? For Corrupteds, you just walk back to Carleon half a map away and have 2 markets to choose from to sell it. For solo dungeons, well, if you're doing tier 8s, you probably have to store your loot in a hideout and then do a transport run back to the royals, where if you die, you literally lose hours and hours of work. If you don't have a large guild caravan, you're putting yourself at an extreme risk. Lastly, number 3, how do you get from dungeon to dungeon? Well, in Corrupteds, you literally don't have to leave, you simply get an option to chain them together. For solos, on the other hand, you have to jump out, pop another map, or wander around the black and red zone to get to your next one. Again, if you're doing high tier 1s, chances of getting ganked are pretty high because those zones are the highest priority for gankers. All of this is to say that realistically, if invades in Corrupted dungeons only happen 1 in 17 on average, it's genuinely debatable if solos are more or less dangerous than that. With the amount of times you get invaded so low, it really throws off the risk/reward balance that is so crucial to balancing activities. So what does this all mean? What's the point I'm trying to make here? Well, if you ask me if it's better to do solo dungeons or rat Corrupted dungeons, my genuine answer is that you literally have no reason to ever do a high tier solo dungeon over simply ratting a Corrupted dungeon. In fact, I would be so bold as to say that as a solo player, if you want to do an activity for fame or money, you have no reason to do anything but rat Corrupteds. No other activity will even come close to being worth it over them. In terms of design and balance of the game, that means that ratting Corrupted dungeons is broken. It's overpowered, the rewards are way too good, and it needs to be nerfed. How should they be nerfed? That goes back to my original question, risk versus reward. Should you keep the rewards high but increase the risk to balance it? Make it a high risk, high reward PvM activity? Or should you gut the rewards to match the current risk, making ratting Corrupted dungeons less appealing? In my opinion, the answer is very obvious. You have to gut the rewards. It's pretty much impossible to increase the risk of ratting Corrupted dungeons without making Corrupteds more frustrating for PvP players. No one goes into a Corrupted dungeon so that they can stomp some rats. Having really high risk reward PvM activities is good for the game, and it would be great to have more of them, but there are so many opportunities to grade those without taking away from the intended purpose of a Corrupted dungeon. Take open world mobs and mob camps for example. They're dead content, literally useless to go out and kill. The rewards are minuscule for how large the risk is. Why not make these a high risk, high reward solo small group activity? The static solo dungeons in the roads are another good example of this. It's much healthier for the game to keep the corrupted dungeons for their intended purpose and only reward those who go into it for PvP. And it seems like SBI agrees with this. On January 13 of this year, in the Rise of Avalon patch 12, SBI made this change. Decreased the value of boss chests in Stalker and Slayer Corrupted dungeons by 17.5%, but increased the percentage of boss loot received when killing another player from 50% to 100%. This change is intended to promote PvP in Corrupted dungeons. Obviously, this wasn't even remotely close to being a big enough change, but it gives me hope that SBI is looking at the issue in what I think is the correct way. Now, I'm not saying that you should simply gut the rewards from loot chests, because that probably isn't the way to go. In order to balance it with soul dungeons, you would have to lower the loot you get by around 50 to 80% per chest. I'm not kidding, 50 to 80%. At the very least, the rewards for corrupted dungeons have to be halved to put into line. This would just feel bad though, because the vast majority of chests you open would be complete garbage, which would affect PvP players as well, especially those that don't win that much. Rather, SBI will have to get a little bit more creative with balancing, maybe adding in a new buff or debuff system for killing players or breaking crystals that lowers or raises the amount of loot you get from chests. But that's for SBI to decide and not me. Really, the point of this video is to try to get this across. If you ask, should I rat corrupted dungeons or do any other solo activity, the answer is pretty well always rat corrupted dungeons. Ratting needs a huge nerf to be put in line with other solo activities, and the only reasonable way to do that is to gut the rewards you get from it. And gut them in a way that doesn't punish PvP players. But that's enough ranting from me. What do you think? Put a comment down below about what you think should be done about the ridiculous rewards that corrupted dungeons currently give for rats.